Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We are going to spend some time in this first hour as we broadcast solely in the state of Texas to focus on some very important Texas races. And this is one of the things we really enjoy about this new opportunity we have with our local radio station. So often in the past, we've had to make everything national, and certainly a lot of politics is state and local. So I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation today. I'm surrounded by some very smart and successful women who all won their primaries and will be running, of course, in the general election. Let me first of all introduce Angela Paxton. I would imagine you would know her because of all the television commercials, but again, the Senate race in the 8th District there, the Texas Senate race. And Angela, of course, you are an educator, an individual that has been involved in public, private, and homeschooling for 22 years. Of course, many people know your husband. He's been in studio with us as well. And so welcome to the program.
Well, thanks so much. And I actually bring greetings from the Attorney General. Hello to all you guys and all of the listeners this morning.
We're going to have to get him in a lot more than now that we can focus on the state of Texas. Usually we get him in only when it's a national issue, when he and other attorney generals are suing. And this is going to be just a great opportunity. So we're so grateful for having the local station. Lisa Luby Ryan has also been in the studio with us before, and she is an individual that won her race in the House District 114 and is also involved still as an interior designer. So you spend a fair amount of your time doing design and running a business, and then out there campaigning as well, don't you?
I do. Thank you, Kerby, for having me, and excited, Angela and Candy, to be with you all today. And so I'm trying to find the balance.
That's tough.
It is tough.
I do not know how you do it.
It's working so far.
Yes. Well, and Candy Noble is joining us for the first time in studio. But again, I've been following her race because just across Greenville is where her district is. I couldn't vote for her, but did support her in District 89. And again, I've known her and her family. I hate to admit it, we've known each other now for decades, haven't we?
That's true. What an honor it was to have your support, and what an honor to be here today.
Well, let's, if we can, get into the campaign for just a few minutes, and we're going to look at ahead. But I always kind of like to look in the rearview mirror, and maybe we could talk about some of these campaigns. And Lisa, let me come to you first. Lisa Luby Ryan, you are running not only against a fairly well-known individual, but an incumbent. And I think they did a study years ago in which they said that individuals who are incumbents have a greater re-election percentage than some of the people that used to run for the Politburo in Russia. So when you first started saying and telling people I'm running against an incumbent, there must have been a few people that wondered about that. What happened?
Well, they thought I was crazy. You know, I didn't seek to run for this office. I had many people come to me wanting a change of leadership. And after much prayer and counsel with my family and friends and inner circle confidants, we decided to do it. And, you know, Kerby, every day we knocked doors. I personally knocked on almost 5,000 doors, telling our story and telling people what I believed in and what I stood for. And as an entrepreneur who owns 5 businesses in Dallas, a mom who's raised 2 amazing boys here, and the involvement in the Republican Party and in civic activities and boards, my name was wide and deep, and people know me and what I stand for. And I think the Trump election, it awakened the giant, and people are ready for change. They wanted integrity, they wanted transparency, and they wanted someone to come to the door and say, I believe in you more than I believe in the bureaucrats in Austin or in D.C. And our story resonated. And I'll tell you the other thing we did that I think made a huge difference. I handed out 12,000 households my personal cell number to voters, because if they're going to vote for me, I want them to know me and I want to know them and I want them to call me. And I think that made a difference, being accessible, because I told them, I'm not interested in being your politician. I'm interested in serving you and being your representative. And here's my number, and this is how you can get in touch with me. So it has been, I'm still giddy.
Yes.
I'm still pinching myself.
Isn't that amazing?
But it shows what hard work. And when you're passionate about something and you believe in what you're doing, because as we were talking earlier, if I didn't think I could take my leadership skills, my business knowledge, and go down and make a difference, I wouldn't have done it, because it is a sacrifice. But you know what? The reward is worth the sacrifice. And I'm just excited and humbled and ready to serve.
I would think so. We talked about House District 114. How about House District 89? Because in some respects, both of you running for representative districts and not necessarily having TV ads, which we'll talk about in just a minute, had to wear out a lot of shoe leather. And Candy, I know that's exactly what you did.
We did. We had some amazing volunteers that helped as well, but we knocked on almost 7,000 doors, and it is just amazing to get to meet the people that you want to represent, to get to hear what's important to them, and their issues are real and deep, and their needs are real, and they want someone to hear that. As Lisa said, they want someone to reflect that in Austin when policies are made, when it comes to their children, their grandchildren. They want to know that somebody's got their back and that you're not going to take Texas off in a way that does not keep Texas strong.
And again, one of the things that many people that know you know that you've been, for example, on the state Republican Executive Committee, but people in District 89, they just might know this individual that you ran against, who had probably more visibility than you did, didn't he?
Yeah, he had been a justice of the peace for many years in the area, and at least part of the district. And so I had to start kind of from zero on name recognition. Loved my big red signs that went out early and stayed up. And I had a big honor of having been endorsed not just by Kerby Anderson, but by the governor. And we were able to put that on our signs, and I think that helped as well with name recognition.
Angela, let me come to you, because everybody knows your race. Wasn't it the most expensive Texas Senate race in history?
It's up there in the in the annals of history now, right? We knew that it would probably be expensive, but it certainly exceeded everyone's expectations.
Yes. Well, and again, these two individuals had to walk a lot. You certainly did as well. But a lot of this battle was just fought out on television and on the Internet. I was amazed at the number of Internet ads that would pop up between, you and your opponent. And so, again, all three of you had something in common, and that is you were actually going against somebody that had some pretty good visibility, right?
It's true. And, of course, my opponent got in the race about 6 months before I did. I'm a little bit like Lisa's race. It wasn't something that I had set out to do on my own initiative, really. It was a situation where in August, the person that my husband and I and most of the folks that I knew were supporting actually stepped out of the race.
Yes.
And so that was when I started getting phone calls from folks asking me if I would please consider running. And I think, what they were interested in was not just someone who was conservative, but they wanted someone who cared about representing them.
Right.
And that was a major difference between my opponent and me. He moved into the district to run, and I'd lived here for 21 years.
Right. You lived in McKinney. We need to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about what this legislative session might look like. I know I don't want to jinx it, but let's assume all three of you win your general election and you are then serving in Austin. We've got a lot of things to talk about, and I want to get some of your comments about that. But if you would like to ask a question, you can do so. Of course, you could give us a call, 800-351-1212, but I know most of you just simply like to watch us on the YouTube live channel. Or, of course, you can also send us an email, and we'll send some of those questions on as well. I've got a whole list, so I don't need any more. But if you want to ask a question or make a comment, feel free to do so. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you've heard the phrase politics is downstream from culture. It is a way of explaining that what is at stake in our world often begins upstream in the culture. Popular culture is all around us and delivered to us through broadcast media and social media. We perceive the world through news reports, through movies, through entertainment programs, and through music. Every form of communication has a message. Sometimes it's blatant and intentional. Often it is subtle and not even perceived by the artist, actor, musician, or broadcaster. He or she may simply be telling a story, but that story comes from a worldview perspective. A wise and discerning Christian should frequently ask, what message is being delivered? Is the viewpoint true or false? How does it line up with biblical principles? Well, let's face it, many of us merely accept what we read, see, and hear uncritically. And that brings us to politics. We are bombarded by messages every day. Most Americans watch lots of television, listen to a fair amount of music, and visit various websites. Unless they are approaching all of the entertainment with lots of discernment, they'll begin to accept the worldview perspective of the writer, the actor, the director, the musician who controls the story and the perspective. Most of these stories come from a liberal, secular viewpoint that often becomes easier to embrace. If someone stood up and lectured to you about abortion, homosexuality, gender identity, your guard would be up. But if the stories portray liberals, feminists, and gays in a positive light, they get into our head and emotions. And if they portray conservatives and Christians in a negative light, the same thing happens. All this to say that we need to pay attention to popular culture because politics is downstream from culture. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hello, I'm Chuck Bentley, CEO of Crown Financial Ministries. I so appreciate the great work of Kerby Anderson and the Point of View team. Every day they step into the public arena to make a stand for truth by shedding biblical light on the issues that confront us all. Never backing away or compromising on the truth, they're making a difference for you, for me, and the next generation. It's important that we Christians put our money behind those causes that are having a meaningful impact. My wife and I personally support Point of View, and we encourage you to do the same.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Last week we had our Truth Team Week, and we were able to raise some financial support. And, of course, we just had a chance a moment ago here to hear from Chuck Bentley, who actually is part of Crown Financial, an organization originally started by Larry Burkett and Howard Dayton and others, and certainly wanted to encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. I understand that we still have some money left over from our match, about $5,500, which means if you wanted to make a gift of $100, it becomes $200, or if you wanted to join the Truth Team at $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, that would be $720. So again, feel free to visit the website, click on that button that says Truth Team, and you'll know a little bit more. In studio with us today, we have Candy Noble, Angela Paxton, and Lisa Luby Ryan. And Candy, let me come to you for just a minute because we have women here. But there's this idea that a woman should support so-called women's issues, and that's been defined by a lot of progressives as, well, reproductive rights and gender equality and gender pay equity and all sorts of other issues, support of Planned Parenthood. I know you disagree with that, so how do you respond to people that say, you're a woman, you should support so-called women's issues?
it's funny that you should ask that. As I was poll greeting during early voting, it was one rainy day, and I was under my umbrella, and a man climbed under my umbrella, actually held my umbrella above my hand, and told me I should be ashamed of myself for being a woman and a Republican. And I proceeded to tell him what I'm going to tell you today is I am proud to be a Republican woman, because we are for women from the moment of conception, that we know that women don't need government to interfere with them to be successful. As the mom of 3 daughters, I'm very proud of their success as women, and they don't need government intruding into their lives in order to be successful. They are successful because they work hard and they're smart women. And that's the message of Republicans, is that we like the opportunity to do well in the free enterprise system, and we do well, as Lisa does, in the free enterprise system.
Lisa, let's come to you, because a very successful individual in interior decorating and all the things that you do in interior design. People would say, she's got to be a Democrat, right? You know, you got to have supported these kinds of ideas because you're a successful woman, and the Republicans are known for keeping women down. How do you respond to that?
Well, I couldn't do what I do if I was a Democrat. You know, I want the government as far away from me and my businesses as they can. That's not their role to be in our business. You know, the regulations, they put regulations on the interior design business. I'm for less regulations. Let people do what they were created to do. They will work. It's in us to work hard, and the government just needs to get out of our way and let us do that. And it's interesting. I spoke to the Young Conservatives of Texas convention here on Saturday, and one of the young girls asked a question, and she said, what do you think when the former presidential candidate says that we only voted the way we were told to vote? And I said, I hope you were offended. And she said, yes, we were. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, first of all, you have to know desperate people say desperate things, which Hillary did. But these girls, they love being independent. It empowers them. They're educated. They find the information out for themselves. So you know what? I am 100% pro-women. No one's helped me along the way. I've done it. I've rolled up my sleeves like these other 2 women here. And we're going to go fight for women. We're going to lead women. We're going to lead the way and champion for women and let them know that in Texas, women, you can be anything you want to be.
Yes. Again, if you know these women around the table, it's hard to believe that their boss or their husband told them how to vote. But nevertheless, that's one of those kinds of ideas that didn't make a lot of sense to most of us that know those of you that are very sharp and articulate women. But how do you respond to that, Angela? Because, again, you're going to hear that when you go to Austin. I know others have heard that before, just the idea that women are supposed to support the so-called women's issues.
Well, it is an interesting thing. And, you know, I think the first thing that I go back to is I grew up in a world where I really didn't first think of myself by gender. I thought of myself as a human being made by God, made in the image of God. I grew up in the church. I had parents, grandparents that encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do. You know, I grew up in a generation where the sky was the limit. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to go back to a mentality that says you're a woman first, mm-hmm. and here's what you can do. Here's how you have to think. If you ask me, it's the left that's telling women how they have to think and how they have to vote. But I couldn't agree more with these 2 ladies, and in particular, Candy, the comment that you made about life. And of course, many people know my story as an adopted child.
That's right.
And, you know, I think the very first right that every woman ought to have is the right to be born. And there is a reason that the Declaration of Independence says that we are endowed by our Creator, not by government, but by our Creator, with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's a reason life is listed first. Mm-hmm. And I am so excited and eager about the opportunity to stand for that as an adopted child with my personal story, to make a difference for women to come in the arena of life.
Excellent. You know, one of the things that we've talked about so often in the national level is that you have good legislation in the House of Representatives that goes to the U.S. Senate to die. But in Texas, it's just the reverse. You have really good legislation in the Texas Senate that goes to the House to die. Lisa, talk about this for just a minute. Can we change that? Obviously, we're going to have a different Speaker of the House. Have you thought about what that's going to entail so that when you get some great legislation from Angela and the Lieutenant Governor and people like that, it doesn't just sit there and die in the House of the Texas House, I should say?
No, I think that's great. And I'm looking forward. I love that Angela's going to go lead the way for us and go down there. But I think that I'm personally going to look at legislation that, excuse me, is good for all Texans, not just a few. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we can there's an amazing slate of candidates. And if we can get these candidates in Austin in November, the legislation can do some great things for Texas. Because, so goes Texas, so does America.
That's right.
Goes America. And so I'm just excited about it. I think there's some great issues coming up. There's some unresolved issues from last session that need to be addressed. But I think there's a lot of good on the horizon for Texas. And I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Candy, you'll be a representative. And again, you've seen, as you've been in Austin many times before, great legislation makes it over and then never even gets out of committee in the House.
It's been frustrating to watch as someone that goes down and lobbies for good legislation, to watch bipartisan bills that have, 90 co-sponsors not even get a hearing because the speaker didn't like it, him alone, and he would refer it to a committee for it to die. And that is not representative of a good representative republic, which is what we have. There's 150 members, not one. And so I'm excited about electing, and I know Lisa is too, about electing a new speaker, someone that will be fair with legislation and let it be heard by committees and then be heard by the full body and voted on. I'm very optimistic about who that new speaker might be, and hopefully someone that's very fair when it comes to letting legislation be heard.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I know I have some former teachers here. I want to talk about education because we've got some of you that have certainly thought about that and what we can do. And again, if you have any comments, of course, you can be watching us on Facebook Live, or of course, you can also watch it on our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to know about any one of these candidates and find their websites, we'll mention that at the end, but we also have that linked there as well. And just as we go to the break, let me just mention that we just finished off our Truth Team Week last week. But if you would still like to join with us, we have some of that match money still on the table. And for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can certainly be a Truth Team member. We've also encouraged some of you, if you wanted to join at a higher level, which is $45 a month. Why $45? Well, Marlon Maddox started the show back in 1972, so we've been on air for more than 45 years. We also include not only the Bible Stick, but also these booklets and all sorts of other resources. So if you'd like to know a little bit more, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can call our pledge line at any point, 800-347-5151, and we'll continue our conversation with Angela Paxton, Lisa Luby Ryan, and Candy Noble right after these important messages.
One minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Lisa Luby Ryan with us, Candy Noble and Angela Paxton. We're going to spend some time talking about education. Of course, 4 children, 3 children, 2 children. 5 grandchildren, right? And
we have
more on the way. Three on the way.
Yeah.
So when we talk about kids and you talk about education, everybody's all in. Plus, we got a couple of teachers, former teachers here. So, Angela, start us off. You've been a math teacher, and you've been involved in education. I think I have down here 22 years in one way or another. Go
22 years. I was certified to teach in Texas. My undergraduate was in mathematical science. It was a math computer science degree from Baylor. Went back to school and got certified to teach. Did my master's in education at the University of Houston in Clear Lake, and then began my career teaching high school math and physics and whatever else they sent my way in public school. When our children were born, we actually homeschooled our kids for up through early elementary, and then I went back to the teaching profession when our kids were all school age, and I taught at a private Christian school up in the Frisco area, Legacy Christian Academy.
That's right.
All 4 of our kids graduated from there. We were there for almost 12 years.
Yes.
And, I guess there's really no one in the Senate that has a background in public, private, and homeschooling.
You're it.
As an instructor myself, and then also as a parent. But of course, education is something that we all care about in Texas. Parents are a very large part of our population. Obviously, we spend 52% of our general revenues on education, and it's a little surprising, in a certain sense, that we don't have educators in the Senate or really many in the House. Someone with a boots on the ground sort of perspective for how we spend that money. But at the same time, it's not so surprising, because as an educator, you're really not in a position to take off the spring semester every other year to go down and work on legislation. But I'm thrilled to have the opportunity and the background to bring to such an important topic in Texas.
Well, you got the State Board of Education, you got TEKS, you got tests, you've got all sorts of things, you've got curriculum. And so I think you'll bring just a lot to the table that has been needed for some time, especially in the Senate. Lisa, let me come to you for just a minute. Lisa Luby Ryan. And again, you'll be in the Texas House, at least that's what we're assuming will take place. And there are still some things that can be done even in legislation to help education, right?
There is. And that was one of the number one things that we heard when we went to the door, knocking on doors. And what can we do to change our school system? And my district is completely different. On the west, they all go to private schools.
That's true.
And on the east, they're all Lake Highlands, and they are very involved in their public schools. So I have 2 different voices in my district, but my commitment to them was I am pro-education. We are going to go down there. I think what we need to do is look at how we get money into the classrooms. We have got to get the money to the classrooms so the kids learn. There's a lot of money, as Angela says, 52% of the revenue goes to education, but we're not educating our children like we as the state of Texas should be. And so I'm excited. I'd love to serve on an education committee. And, I have a special needs child, an autistic child.
Yes.
So we've been
in
the public school system, and we've been in the private school system. But as a parent, and this is one of my things at the door, is I believe no one knows what's best for their child or wants best for their child than a parent. And as having an autistic son, we championed for him. He graduated high school. He went on to Abilene Christian University, graduated in 5 years, which most kids without learning differences don't do these days. He works on his own. He has a job. He lives on his own. And that's because we don't say I can't, I won't, or why me. But we've got to get parents and children understanding that knowledge and education is what will set them apart from everybody else. And can I just add one thing for the record? that's Candy that has 5 grandchildren, not me or Angela. Yeah. We're going to give those grandchildren to you, Candy.
I love them. I'm keeping them.
And she's taking care of 2 of them right now, right?
That's right. That's right.
Angela.
I wanted to hop on to something that Lisa mentioned. You know, what we know from research on achievement, student achievement, is that the 2 most significant factors are engaged parents and great teachers. And so, you know, she's talking about the essence of what makes education happen, what drives student achievement. And we've got to get the dollars to the classroom. And primarily what that means is we've got to get those dollars to teacher salaries, really, so that we're attracting, retaining, helping with professional development, great classroom teachers who are going to make a difference and help the kids learn.
Well, I'm sorry, Kerby, because what's happening and what we're seeing is these teachers are not making a lot of money. They have a lot of responsibility.
Yes, they do.
And yet they're being asked to, out of your salary, bring snacks to your kids.
Yes.
Buy school supplies for your bulletin boards. You know, when there's so many things, simple, easy changes that can be made in educating these kids. It's simple little things just to start. But I'm excited. I think we can, and I think women are important, having them, just as you said, as teachers and moms.
You know, Bill Bennett, when he was the Secretary of Education, published a little booklet called What Works. And we know what works. And, of course, Angela talked about what works. We found out one thing that doesn't work. Huge, bloated educational bureaucracies don't work very well.
That's true.
And so I want to get one of these former teachers to talk about this. If we put the money in the classroom in the hands of the teachers and have maybe more streamlined education, wouldn't we do better?
I agree. I'm not only a former teacher myself, but I have 2 daughters that are teachers. One that's currently teaching in my district where I'm running. And the truth is that studies show that only 21 cents is getting down to the classroom level, where the biggest indicator of success for a child is. And that is incredibly it's just not a good fit for our kids. We need ways to innovate in the classroom and to innovate, to motivate our districts to getting that money to the classroom and to the students. And you know, one of the things we haven't hit on is too often schools are one size fits all. And public schools in particular can be one size fits all. And as Lisa mentioned, when you have a child that doesn't fit that one size, it's kind of hard as a parent to innovate on your own without having a lot of money to invest. And so one thing that we can do is help parents be empowered in the educational dollars that they spend on their children, that are spent on their children. And I tell you, I've got Plano in part of my district, and they have a huge problem with transparency when it comes to Robin Hood. You know, they're getting, let's see, 27 cents of every educational dollar is going, Austin, to someone else, that they have no voice in how that money is spent. And I'll tell you, as a taxpayer, trying to find out where the Robin Hood money is going and how it's being spent is impossible.
Transparency.
Yes. And I think that that's something that we can do right away, is make those educational dollar, especially when it comes to Robin Hood, transparent for the taxpayers.
Yes. Well, again, Lisa, you gave us a great illustration that local control makes sense, because education in Tyler, Texas is very different than education in El Paso. Education in McKinney is very different than Oak Cliff. And so it does seem to me that somewhere along the line we need to allow a lot more local control, because the needs and the challenges are very different, even from school district to school district, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I made an effort through my campaign. I went and met with every principal at the elementary, junior high, and high school during my campaign, because I wanted to know, what are your needs? How could I help you as a legislator? None of them ever complained. They're passionate about these kids. But I will tell you, one elementary school, he had a afternoon tutor coming in and teaching these children with dyslexia. And they could see such a change daily. And these kids would run after school to her class. Well, the parents of the students that could afford it started pulling her away and offering to pay her privately. And she went to the principal and said, you know, I would love to stay here, but I need to be paid. He said, I've got the money. I'm going to keep you. went to his higher beings, whoever that is, and they said, well, you've got the money, but it's not to be used on her. It's to be used on this. He said, but this will not impact our children. She does. And they said, sorry. But these are kids. That's the kind of simple changes we can make. Boots on the ground. Let these principals and these teachers tell us what their needs are, not the bureaucrats telling the teachers what their needs are.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes with these two individuals, again, running for the Texas House District 89 and Texas House 114, as well as Senate District 8. And so, again, Angela Paxton, Lisa Luby Ryan, and Candy Noble. And if you would like to join with us, feel free to give us a call or simply can leave a message on our Facebook Live or even on our email, and we'll take some of those questions as well. A lot more to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jewish members of the Orthodox faith cannot push or carry objects outside their home during the Sabbath. However, for 2 millennia throughout the entire world, their religious tradition has expanded their home area with the creation of an eruv, but not in New Jersey. In the borough of Tenafly, Orthodox residents asked the city for permission to attach small black strips called lekis to the telephone poles in order to set the eruv boundaries. These strips are nearly identical to ordinary ground wires and certainly less noticeable from the holiday displays, signs pointing out directions to local churches, or even house numbers the city permitted on the poles on a case-by-case basis. But the city would not allow the eruvs. As a result, the Orthodox community was homebound. Mothers couldn't push their babies in strollers to the synagogue. They couldn't even carry their prayer books to the synagogue. Without court intervention, the city's action would effectively prevent the Orthodox community from practicing their faith entirely. Thankfully, the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit realized this grave First Amendment violation. It concluded that, quote, the government cannot discriminate between religiously motivated conduct and comparable secularly motivated conduct in a manner that devalues religious reasons for acting, unquote. Singling out the religious conduct of one group not only prevents the free exercise of that faith group, it damages everyone's religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
I am just so thankful for you, Kerby, and for you continuing in this ministry and for people whom God has lifted up in these last days. I just want to thank you and just ask that God would bless you.
I appreciate Point of View. You've been great and wonderful. A lot of information, and I really appreciate all your work you do.
I just wanted to call in and express my gratitude for the awesome work that you guys have done. It's I've been listening for about 6 months now, and it's just been something I can hardly miss. Thank you for giving me my daily dose of truth with a biblical worldview. I'd just like to encourage anyone listening that's inspired by Point of View to give what they can. I'm a California millennial and Christian, and I now can say I support Point of View.
I've been listening to Point of View regularly for the past year and a half, and I have to say it's been my favorite radio program. Thank you, Kerby, for continuing Marlon's legacy and carrying the torch of Point of View.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
45 years of broadcast. It'll be 46 years in the fall. Marlon Maddie started back in 1972. Before there was a Sean Hannity or a Rush Limbaugh, there was a Marlon Maddox. And Marlon Maddox, of course, is going on to be with the Lord. And for the last 14 years, I've been sitting in this chair doing this broadcast as well. And we are privileged to have around the round table Angela Paxton, Lisa Luby, Ryan, and Candy Noble. And Candy, let me come to you for just a minute. The day after the primary, we had Jonathan Saenz on here, and we talked about some of the races, including Lisa's race and Angela's race, but we spent a fair amount of time talking about these propositions. Now, you know all about that because you helped put those on the ballot, and he reminded us that the most popular of the propositions this time was the one on the so-called bathroom bill or privacy bill. Talk about how those propositions show up on our ballot and why that one ended up being so popular.
Well, it's interesting because as a state party, both parties are allowed to put propositions on the ballot. It's by election code. And as the chairman of resolutions, it was up to us, the resolutions committee, to come up with those ballot propositions. We came up with 11. It was quite a lot, the most we've ever had. And they're kind of an opinion survey of Republican voters who are going to the ballot box. And that the privacy one in particular was very interesting because it passed with 90.26% statewide. In fact, it was interesting in our analysis to find that it didn't seem to matter whether you were urban or rural. That was a really, really important ballot issue to Republican voters. As the mom of 3 daughters and granddaughters, we want, when we go to a place in a building, in a public building that does not have security cameras, and never should bathrooms have security cameras, we want to know that we're safe and that the people that are in there are like-minded and safe. Mm-hmm. And I think that plays well. And I don't know why we're even having to have this conversation.
Yes, that's the question. A lot of our listeners say, why are we even having this conversation? Ryan Anderson, who, of course, wrote this most recent book, When Harry Became Sally, which I thought was a creative title, said, it's not that we think that somebody who's transgender might actually do something wrong, but it is with this idea that you can't keep men out of the bathroom, that some person that's a predator, Lisa, might actually use that for their advantage. Isn't that the issue?
That is the issue. But, I think Republicans did a really poor job explaining what the bathroom bill was and what it stood for. And that was the big differentiator between my opponent and myself, because he was completely against the bathroom bill. And that came up all the time. And here's set aside, Candy, I agree with you. And as legislators, we are to protect our citizens. Absolutely. But set that part aside, okay? What the bathroom bill also, it was an overreach of government by one superintendent making a decision on his own that impacted many children and families without the consent of the parents. The second thing it did, and no accountability to that superintendent, the other thing it did was it allowed private businesses such as myself to make the determination on how I want my bathrooms to be. Do I want it to be like a Target or a Hobby Lobby? And so I could choose, not mandated by the government. So I think it will come back up. And when you talk those points to people, then it makes sense. But we didn't present it that way. It was more than just boys and girls, in bathrooms.
Yes. Angela, I want to come to you, one, because, of course, it initiated in the Senate, but also, of course, you were married to the Attorney General. So I'd love to get some of your thoughts about how to present this.
Well, and you both bring up some good points. I mean, people forget the origins of this issue. And, the argument we heard from the left in the mainstream media for the most part was, government needs to get out of this. Well, the reason government got involved was because President Obama initiated this action. And the Fort Worth superintendent, as Lisa said, initiated policy in the Fort Worth School District without any input from parents or any other stakeholders in their community. And I remember when that happened, because Ken, my husband as Attorney General, went to Fort Worth and was part of some conversations with lots of families. And one of the first things he told me was, you know what, Angela, when I looked at the crowd, there weren't, this was bipartisan. It was ethnically diverse. The thing that everyone had in common was they were parents. Mm-hmm. And it didn't matter if they were black, white, red, green, whatever, if they were Republican or Democrat, if they were parents, they wanted their kids to be safe. And this is the thing. I mean, safety is one of the core functions of government. And it was very mischaracterized by its opponents. It was presented as something that was bigoted and that was discriminatory. That was not what it was about. It was about safety. And government has a duty and a responsibility to make sure that government buildings and schools are safe.
Yes. Well, again, there are all sorts of other issues we can talk about, but I've left just a little bit of time for us to go around the table one more time and talk about if people want to find you. Of course, we have links on the website, but mention your website. Lisa's been very good about giving out her email, and Candy, maybe you would too, but let's go around one more time and talk about how, if somebody wants to connect with you and your campaign, how they can do so.
Well, I'll start with my email. It's candy@CandaceNoble.com. And Candace is spelled CandaceNoble.com. My website is votecandynoble.com. And I was getting mixed up with my Facebook. My Facebook is Candy Noble HD89. I would love to hear from folks.
I might just mention next to each one of your pictures, we have both your Twitter and Facebook, but you can mention it as well in case somebody's driving. I don't want them to have an accident while it's that. But Lisa, again, if people want to contact you, how can they do so?
So I'm not going to give out my mobile number over the air. I did to 12,000 households, but I will give my email is info@lisalubyryan.org. And I, too, have a Facebook page, Lisa Luby Ryan. And we're just, Kerby, thank you so much. What a privilege to be here with you today and these other amazing women.
I suspect we'll be doing this more often. And again, like I said, both of your Twitter and Facebook pages are next to your picture. And Angela, for yours as well.
Well, thanks, Kerby. It's my email is Angela@AngelaPaxton.com, and my Facebook and Twitter are Angela Paxton TX. And it is very exciting. We the three of us have had lots of conversations. I look forward to roundtabling like this as we go forward, and hearing from your listeners, because I know that's what we care about. We care about hearing and taking those ideas of people who love the Lord, who love their communities, and who want to be salt and light to make a difference. And we're looking forward to being those voices in the Texas Senate and the Texas House.
Sure are.
And can I just add to that? I think what's amazing about the three of us is that we just want to serve. Yeah. Texas has been good to us, and this is our way of serving and giving back.
I think so. And all three of you worn out some shoes walking the precinct, so it's obvious that you want to get a response from your various constituencies. But we need to take a break. And again, I want to thank all three of you for being here. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Thanks, Kerby.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we have a lot more to cover, and you certainly can find out more about each one of these individuals by going to our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
1 minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Of course, we are well aware of the fact that there was an attack from the United States on Syria, and the U.S. President Donald Trump, as well as British and French allies, on Saturday have been hailing the joint strikes in Syria in response to the alleged use of chemical weapons, and warned Damascus that any repetition could be met with renewed firepower. We're going to get into the issue of the Middle East, and we have some articles that we've posted, but we also wanted to use this to talk about the broader issue of Israel and the Middle East. And so in order to do that, we also have in studio with us our good friend, Dr. Ron Rhodes, individual that has both his master's degree and his doctoral degree from Dallas Theological Seminary, a man that teaches in so many different venues across the country, and is the author of an enormous number of books, but his newest one is Israel on High Alert. What can we expect next in the Middle East? It is published by Harvest House, and it couldn't come out at a better time when everybody is talking about Israel, the Gaza Strip, and Syria. So are you a prophet? You figured this out. These books are coming out exactly at the time we need to begin to talk about them.
Well, I agree with you. The timing is just perfect for this book, but unfortunately I didn't plan it that way, nor did I know that all this stuff was going to happen. But, you know, as soon as all this stuff started happening, I wasn't surprised.
Yes.
Because the scriptures do give us a feel for what the last days are going to look like. Maybe the place to begin is Zechariah 12:2, where the prophecy is given, I will make Jerusalem like an intoxicating drink that makes the nearby nations stagger when they send their armies to besiege Jerusalem and Judah. You know, a lot of nations around Jerusalem.
Yes.
And guess what? They're Arab and Muslim nations. And one thing you got to keep in mind is that little old Israel is just about 8,000 square miles, whereas Israel is surrounded by about 5 million square miles of Arab and Muslim real estate. And so there's a lot of staggering, like the prophet said, these days, and they're reeling. And that's why when all this conflict emerged just in the last couple of weeks, I wasn't surprised, because this is exactly the way Scripture said it would be.
You know, there was an interesting editorial that was in the Wall Street Journal that pointed out that really one of the successes under Ronald Reagan and even before that was that that is, the West, was able to keep Russia out of the Middle East. And, of course, now you have Russia in Syria. You have Russia working with Libya. You have Russia working with Iran. And if that doesn't sound to me a lot like what I read in Ezekiel 38 and 39, now, again, it doesn't use the words Iran, but it uses the word Persia. And then we have others, with Cush and Put and Gog and Magog, Meshach, Tubal. Sort that out for just a minute, because what we are seeing now is something that just a few decades ago, Ron, wasn't even thinkable. And yet now we're talking about Russia and Syria together, Russia and Iran together, in ways that wouldn't even have made sense maybe back in the 1960s and 70s.
Well, and even goes back further than that, because way back in Ezekiel's day, people would have wondered what these various nations who are not right next to each other might have in common to make them want to invade Israel. Now, today we know Islam came into existence back in the 7th century, and most of these countries are Islamic, Russia being the exception, but there's an awful lot of Muslims in Russia today and an awful lot of Muslim mosques there. And by looking at archaeology and looking at historical books and various other kinds of studies, we can figure out exactly who these various nations are. A lot of people say, well, are you going to really believe that Rosh refers to Russia just because they sound alike? No, if that was the reason, I wouldn't take that either. I wouldn't believe that either. But the fact is that we've got all kinds of inscriptions in caves referring to a people known as Rosh or Ras or Rus that refers to the people who live now in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Rosh is said to be to the uttermost north of Israel. And if you draw a line straight north, you go right through Moscow. So we know that Rosh is Russia. We know that Persia is Iran. And we can say that because just up until recent days, Iran was called Persia.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the interesting thing. Iran actually, as Persia, used to have much wider borders back in Bible times. In other words, the west and the east borders went far out to the east and west, much more than today. And so when we read about the term Persia, that's referring to a much larger territory that's Islamic than just modern-day Iran. And then you've also got references like to Beth Togarmah. We're talking about Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
There's references to Libya. There's references to the Sudan. Some of the nations around the Black and the Caspian Seas, which are all Islamic. And then there's kind of a catch-all term added in. It says, all the other peoples with you.
Yeah.
And so that seems to include some other Islamic nations that are not specifically mentioned. But anyway, this is going to be a massive northern coalition that moves against Israel in the end times.
So again, if you look at Ezekiel 38 and try to look at those, and again, your book does such a very good job. By the way, it's published by Harvest House, 250 pages, which again, all sorts of documentation, which would be very helpful for you. You will see that those are the nations on the outside, but they're sort of the near and the far. So you have the far nations, and that's, of course, like Russia and Libya, and today what we call Iran, back then was called Persia until 1935, I think it was. But then you have the near ones, and that would be like Lebanon, Syria, and some of those countries, which are in the news today.
Well, now Syria isn't specifically mentioned in the Ezekiel invasion, but it would be included in that reference to the other peoples with you. And when you think about it, it makes good sense that Syria would be involved, because when you look at a map or a globe, you can see that Syria actually touches Israel. It's up at the northeast corner. And from a strategic perspective, if you were a major power like Russia and Iran, well, you would want to have Syria as a strategic position to attack Israel. It just makes good sense. Now, what surprises a lot of people is the idea that Russia will actually join with Muslims in attacking Israel. But you know that there is historical precedent for that. Even back in 1973, when you had Muslims attacking Israel, and I'm talking about Egypt and Syria and some other nations, guess who provided the weapons and the intelligence and, just a lot of the logistics? It was Russia.
Yeah.
And there are several other instances. In fact, back in the 1980s, Menachem Begin discovered a massive storehouse of Russian weaponry pre-positioned in a large storehouse in Pakistan in preparation for a large land invasion into Israel. And it took over 150 large semi-trucks to get all that stuff out of there. And so the point that I'm making is that there's already a precedent that's been set with Russia working with the Muslims against Israel. But all of those invasions pale in comparison to what is yet to come. This Ezekiel invasion is going to be huge.
Yes. Well, again, whether it's the Yom Kippur War or whether it's the Six-Day War or a variety of others or other future invasions, we certainly want to talk about that. And this is why we're talking about this new book, Israel on High Alert. What can we expect next in the Middle East? Of course, we also have to talk about the Gaza Strip because everything's happening out of Gaza these days as well. And it seems like everywhere Israel turns, there's another potential threat. And, of course, we have an anniversary coming up as well. So I wonder if that's significant. So when we come back from the break, I want to talk about that. And we have Dr. Ron Rhodes in studio with us today. So your questions about the Middle East, your questions about prophecy, your questions about Israel, all of those are germane. So let me even open up the phones. After all, the calls are coming in. When Ron Rhodes is here, the calls already start coming in. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you've heard the phrase politics is downstream from culture. It is a way of explaining that what is at stake in our world often begins upstream in the culture. Popular culture is all around us and delivered to us through broadcast media and social media. We perceive the world through news reports, through movies, through entertainment programs, and through music. Every form of communication has a message. Sometimes it's blatant and intentional. Often it is subtle and not even perceived by the artist, actor, musician, or broadcaster. He or she may simply be telling a story, but that story comes from a worldview perspective. A wise and discerning Christian should frequently ask, what message is being delivered? Is the viewpoint true or false? How does it line up with biblical principles? But let's face it, many of us merely accept what we read, see, and hear uncritically. And that brings us to politics. We are bombarded by messages every day. Most Americans watch lots of television, listen to a fair amount of music, and visit various websites. Unless they are approaching all of the entertainment with lots of discernment, they'll begin to accept the worldview perspective of the writer, the actor, the director, the musician who controls the story and the perspective. Most of these stories come from a liberal, secular viewpoint that often becomes easier to embrace. If someone stood up and lectured to you about abortion, homosexuality, gender identity, your guard would be up. But if the stories portray liberals, feminists, and gays in a positive light, they get into our head and emotions. And if they portray conservatives and Christians in a negative light, the same thing happens. All this to say that we need to pay attention to popular culture because politics is downstream from culture. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now. Eric Metaxas.
I would urge anybody who listens to Point of View to understand that unless you are willing to pay something, you can think of it as your tithe as far as I'm concerned, pay something because this is ministry. Point of View is important, it's entertaining, it's vibrant. I hope that folks who listen already know that, and I'm just here to remind them that they should think about supporting it. But I think this is an important ministry. Kerby Anderson is doing the Lord's work, and I would encourage you to step up to the plate. They need your help.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Last week we had our Truth Team Week, and I want to mention just for a moment before we get back to the interview with Dr. Ron Rhodes that usually we have these matches, and the matches actually are met, but on Friday we were not able to meet it. The person that provided it said we could have a little bit longer, so let me just say that we still have about $5,500 on the table, which means if you have not joined the Truth Team or would like to make a gift, your gift will be doubled. If you'd like to make a one-time gift of, say, $100, it becomes $200. I really want to challenge some of you to consider joining with us on the Truth Team, which is as simple as $1 a day, $30 a month, which is $360 a year. That entire match is met, and so that $360 becomes $720. So again, visit the website, pointofview.net, click on the button that says Join Now, or I'll give a different number for the pledge line. The pledge line number is 800-347-5151. If you appreciate our conversation right now as we're talking about Israel and we're talking about Syria and a variety of other topics this hour, certainly would encourage you to call the pledge line, 800-347-5151. Someone will take your pledge there. And again, no gift is too small, no gift is too large. And in studio with us, Dr. Ron Rhodes, as we talk about his new book, Israel on High Alert. And we're coming up to the anniversary of the founding of Israel. And your second chapter in this book would be very good to talk about the amazing rebirth of Israel. It really is an amazing story, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, even in the early 1940s, there were preachers talking about how this would eventually happen. They had no idea that in just a matter of years that it would happen. But Scripture is very clear that it would happen. And what's very interesting is the chronology laid out by Ezekiel, the prophet, 2,600 years ago. Because, number one, he talks about the amazing rebirth of Israel. But then he says something else. He says, after Israel is reborn, Jewish people from all over the globe will stream back to Israel. Now, that's never happened before in biblical history. In biblical history, people, or the Jewish people, would stream back to the Holy Land from one nation, Babylon being an example, Egypt another. But never before have you had Jewish people streaming back to the Holy Land from every country in the world. But you know what? Ever since 1948, that's exactly what's been happening. Now, the main impetus behind that, I hate to say, is anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Anti-Semitism is global. They're experiencing persecution around the world, and that's one of the reasons why they're streaming back to Israel, because once they arrive in Israel, they become immediate citizens. It's like an act of repatriation that they designed for Jewish people. Now, of course, who doesn't like that? Well, the Palestinians. They've been displaced, and meanwhile, any Jew from around the world is welcomed back. But then something else is prophesied by Ezekiel that was to happen after those two things, and that was the Ezekiel invasion that we talked about just a few moments ago. So, I mean, he talks about the chronology right there, and it's just amazing how accurate it was. And this was like 2,600 years ago. Now, let me just mention something real important here, and that is in Ezekiel 37. We read about the valley of the dry bones and how and there's a vision where the bones come back together into a skeleton, and then the muscles come back onto the skeleton, and then the skin comes on top of that, and it becomes a living being. That's a parable of the rebirth of Israel. And the thing I wanted to make note of is that that's a process. It doesn't take place all at once in terms of, you know, all these prophecies being fulfilled. It's a process that's unfolding before our eyes, just like it's a process to see bones coming together and then muscles growing upon it. And so the first part of the process was Israel being reborn again as a nation, and then the second part of the process, which is continuing even today, is that they are streaming back to the Holy Land. And one day, there's going to be the Ezekiel invasion that we were talking about. And even though we don't want to set dates on any of that, it is interesting that Russia has alliances with a number of these nations already. You know, one example would be the close relationship between Russia and Iran. They've got a 25-year treaty for the military buildup of Iran, and Iran is giving $500 million a year to Russia to build up their military. And also, for the first time in history, Iran is allowing Russia to use one of its air bases in its attacks against Syria. And so all of that is just astonishing. And then when you consider the recent things that have been going on in Turkey, you know, I've long wondered how Turkey was going to be a part of all of this because, you know, Turkey's been solidly within NATO and committed to the West and all like that. But, you know, a lot of government officials in Washington are a little bit shaky these days because of what they're seeing take place over there.
With Erdogan, yeah.
You might remember when there was an attempted coup d'etat last year. And the fact is that the United States didn't help at all. But guess who warned Erdogan right before the coup d'etat?
Russia.
It was Putin. That's right. Putin,
Yes.
1 hour before, did that. And so he was able to be saved. And then the next morning, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, was on there talking about how Putin is his new best friend. You see, and so we're seeing kind of a little bit of a shift there that we haven't seen before. And so to me, it just seems like the pieces are coming together, like just like a puzzle. All these different elements of biblical prophecy are coming together.
We'll be talking about a little bit of that anti-Semitism on campus and around the country and around the world in the next hour, but Ron Rhodes in studio with us. Let me take one of many phone calls, so if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll go to South Carolina, WLPG. And Brian, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call. I'd like to call attention to Revelation chapter 20, verse 7 and 8, where it says, if I can get my page here.
Are you ready?
In chapter 20, verse 7, when the 1,000 years are completed, speaking of the millennium, so this after the millennium, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. Now, this reference to Gog and Magog after the millennium is the only other reference in the Bible besides Ezekiel 38 to speak of Gog and Magog. It's quite clear that the two passages are linked together, that the Gog and Magog passage in Ezekiel 38 occurs only after the 1,000 years are completed, when Satan is released from his prison.
Okay. Well, let's react to that, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, actually, there have been quite a number of different propositions as to when this invasion takes place, and the view that was expressed by the caller is one of them. Mm-hmm. And the idea that this is mentioned in connection with the end of the millennium would, at the outset, seem like a strong argument. However, there are many biblical scholars who point out the severe differences between what is described in Ezekiel 36 through 39 with the Gog and Magog battle at the end of the millennium. For example, in terms of the Ezekiel invasion described in Ezekiel, it is strictly Russia and Muslim nations that are involved for a very short time in moving against Israel, and then it's over, just like that. This Gog and Magog attack that's mentioned in Revelation, it says it's from every corner of the earth.
Yeah, four
he
corners.
will go out to deceive the nations in every corner of the earth. Now, many believe that the term Gog and Magog is kind of like a metaphor, like the term Wall Street is. Wall Street is a real street, but it also represents financial institutions in America. And so the idea here is that the entire book of Revelation is symbolic in nature. And just as there are many other symbols in the book of Revelation, so Gog and Magog is symbolic as well. And the idea being that this is going to be a Gog and Magog type of war. Now, in my book, Northern Storm Rising, which came out a number of years ago, I do talk about different views, including the view that this invasion takes place 3.5 years before the tribulation. Others hold that it happens at the very beginning of the tribulation. Others say at the midpoint of the tribulation. Others say at the end of the tribulation. Some say the beginning of the millennium, and others say the end of the millennium. Now, I take the scriptures pretty literally in terms of Ezekiel, and I've always followed the policy that when the plain sense makes good sense, seek no other sense, lest you end up in nonsense. Now, I wouldn't call the other views nonsense, but in terms of the chronology, it just seems like it fits the idea that I expressed earlier, that it happens before the tribulation.
We'll take a break, take some more phone calls right after this.
1 minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue your conversation with Ron Rhodes, and if you'd like to join us on air, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Ron Rhodes in studio with us, and again, Dr. Ron Rhodes has a THM and a THD from Dallas Theological Seminary, has been able to write more than 60 different books. We have a link to his Reasoning from the Scriptures ministries. You can simply go to our website here, and we have a link to ronrhodes.org. You have a list of all the books. You have a list of all the interviews. More recently, you were on John Ankerberg's show with some of our friends. Ed Heinzen has been with us, and Mark Hitchcock and some of the others, and you were the threesome that really began to explain prophecy for all of the people watching John Ankerberg's show.
Well, one of the things that John did was he went through the book of Revelation and circled every single verse he couldn't understand. And there was a lot of circles, let me tell you.
Uh-huh.
And we just went straight through the book of Revelation and explained every one of those. And we did 20 shows together, and so it was fun. I love those guys, by the way.
Yeah.
Ed Heinzen, what an eloquent man. It's not just what he says, but he's just got the most wonderful way of communicating. And, of course, Mark Hitchcock is very knowledgeable.
Yes, we've had him in studio many times.
Yeah, and so I just really enjoyed myself. It was just like a very fun time that we had together, even though there was a couple issues we had, some different opinions on. But, you mentioned all those books that I've written. Let me just tell you that somebody told me recently that I need to join a recovery group for authors who write too much. I'm not aware of any such recovery group myself, but if you know one, you can, certainly let me know.
That's right. 60 books. And again, I have a shelf that's groaning under the weight of Ron Rhodes' books.
That's just funny.
Got all those books and everything. But one other thing I might just mention, people might say, well, he's written all these books, so I certainly could never ask him a question. If there's one thing, Ron, that I always give you credit for is that when people write you an email or ask you a question, you may not be able to get to it right away, especially if you're in the midst of recording 20 different radio programs, 20 different TV programs or whatever. But eventually, you actually try to answer every single letter that you get.
Well, I try to. Like you said, sometimes it can take a while to get to them all, especially after you do a major broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's why our ministry exists. And if we can't help you, we'll find somebody that can help you, We're not kingdom building. We're here just serving the Lord in our part of the vineyard. And, we reason from the Scriptures. That's what we do. That's what the ministry is called. And so a lot of our work is involved in apologetics, defending the Christian faith against any kind of attack that might come up. And we have a little bit different view of apologetics than some. With some apologetics ministry, it's mainly about strong answers. And we believe that, too. We believe that strong answers are critically important. But we also believe that a biblical apologist, it has to begin with the man or the woman who is so committed to Jesus Christ that it shows itself in how you live. You see, strong answers coming from an arrogant person don't mean that much. And unfortunately today, there seems to be more pride and arrogance per square inch in the apologetics community than anywhere else on planet Earth.
Isn't that amazing?
It is. And so I'm just advocating a different kind of apologetics where, number one, we need to focus on godliness and living for Christ and let that show in the way that we treat other people, including Muslims or people of any other religion or occultist. Somebody rings my doorbell, I'm not going to call them a cultist. I'm not going to insult them or anything like that. I want them to come to know the truth in Jesus Christ. And so that's the form of apologetics that we teach at our organization.
And I might just mention, too, that you've written on apologetics. You've written on the various cult and world religions and things of that nature, as well as prophecy. And since we've more recently have had you in talking about prophecy, I think some people know you for that. But there is a lot more that you have covered over the years.
Well, and they're related, too.
Yeah.
In fact, when I became a believer, I was people will be surprised at this, Kerby, but at one time, I was pursuing with some of my brothers and sisters a Hollywood career.
And I knew you were. You were on television, Merv Griffin, everything.
Merv Griffin and Dinah Shore. We did the Tonight Show and a lot of big shows out there. And I met Jesus right in the middle of all that. And then I ended up at Dallas Seminary. I mean, that's quite a switch when you think about it. But the fact is that the thing that got my attention was prophecy.
Yes.
Because prophecy led me to believe that the Bible really must be the Word of God. And so prophecy has an apologetics value.
Yes.
It's what got my attention for the Lord. And so I don't think that they're unconnected. I think that they're very closely connected.
Well, again, Dr. Ron Rhodes in studio with us. We'll take some more phone calls in just a minute, but I want to put one more on the table, and that is a chapter that you have here, which might be a puzzle to some, because you talk about the declining support of Israel and what that has meant. And I would say that some people would say, well, yes, up until about recently, there has been less support for Israel, but yet we look at these votes in the United Nations, and maybe we don't see as much diminishing support from the president, who is willing to move the capital to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. But there's a whole section here that we need to pay attention to, because Israel has to sort of go it alone by the time it fights this battle between them and Gog and Magog, right?
Well, that's right. In fact, let me just give you an example of what we're talking about here. In the news the last couple of days, we talked about Syria. And you know that Syria has gassed some of its own people with deadly chemicals. It's a horrible thing, totally inhumane. There's also been a lot of talk about North Korea in recent days for obvious reasons, especially with the growth in their nuclear program. Well, listen to this. According to the most recent statistics, Syria has only been condemned 17 times by the United Nations, and North Korea 8 times. Israel has been condemned 62 times.
Yes.
Now, if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. But this relates directly to what I told you a little bit earlier, and that is that the reason why so many Jewish people are going back to the Holy Land is because of the anti-Semitism that they're experiencing on a global basis. That seems to be the hook in the jaw that God is using to draw people back to Israel. Now, there is an important clarification that people often ask me about, Kerby, so let me take 10 seconds and answer it. Simply because God's people, Israel, are being drawn back to Israel doesn't mean they're Christians yet.
No.
They're not believers, and in fact, there's a lot that goes on in Israel that we wouldn't agree with.
Yes.
So this is a regathering in unbelief. But Scripture goes on to prophesy that during the tribulation period, in fact, just before the second coming of Christ, there will be a large remnant of Jewish people who recognize Jesus as the Messiah. That's going to be a gathering in belief.
Yes.
So we just need to rightly divide the word of truth on that issue.
Yeah. Gathering and regathering in unbelief, but maybe someday, as we said, in belief. Let's take some more phone calls along the way. If you have some questions about prophecy, Dr. Ron Rhodes, glad to answer those questions. We'll head to Missouri next. And Jerry, what's your point of view?
This doesn't really have anything to do with what you're talking about, but in Daniel 2:43, it's speaking of the last 10 kings. And it says they will mingle themselves with the seed of men. My question would be, who are they that will mingle themselves with the seed of men?
Well, in verse 43, I'm reading it this way. It says, this mixture of iron and clay shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron and clay do not mix. I actually think that this is part of a vision that refers to the future revived Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. And as you know, it's really true that iron and clay don't mix. Iron indicates strength, but the mixture of clay into the iron indicates a lack of unity.
Yes.
It can be brittle. It can break apart. And this is something that's going to characterize the revived Roman Empire. The revived Roman Empire is going to have some basic unity, but at the same time, there's going to be some disunity as well. And in fact, there's a couple of cases mentioned in Scripture where the Antichrist will actually use his strength to bring some into submission. He may even execute some world leaders in order to bring people into submission. And so you need to take this along with what we read about in the book of Revelation. Daniel and Revelation belong together. They're both called apocalyptic books. And apocalyptic literature uses a great deal of symbolism, and typically that symbolism is either defined in the immediate context or in the broader context of Scripture.
Well, again, Daniel 2 and then Daniel 9, you have those two different images. And you have a chapter here on the 70 weeks of Daniel. I thought when we come back from the break, we might talk about that because it helps us understand this idea of the tribulation period, doesn't it?
Well, it does. A lot of people wonder how we know that it's a 7-year period. Well, that's actually from Daniel chapter 9, where you've got a reference to the 70 weeks of Daniel, and, that's 70 weeks of years. And the last week of years is 7 years. And you take that in conjunction with Revelation 11:12, in which we read about half of the tribulation being 3.5 years, And then there's like 3 or 4 different references to 3.5 years as being, half the tribulation period. And so there is good reason to believe that it's a 7-year period.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ron Rhodes. Dr. Ron Rhodes in studio with us today. And let me just commend to you the book. This is one that you no doubt will be able to find in your local bookstore. It is published by Harvest House, 250 pages, and it really does kind of pull a lot of the material that we've talked about together. Israel on high alert. What can we expect next in the Middle East? And it pulls from some of his other books. For example, Chapter 7 on Northern Storm Rising. Well, he has a whole book on that, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of that. We just talked about Chapter 9, the 70 weeks of Daniel. What about the rebuilding of a Jewish temple? We haven't talked about that yet. And how does that happen with all these Muslims around and the Dome of the Rock? We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jewish members of the Orthodox faith cannot push or carry objects outside their home during the Sabbath. However, for 2 millennia throughout the entire world, their religious tradition has expanded their home area with the creation of an eruv. But not in New Jersey. In the borough of Tenafly, Orthodox residents asked the city for permission to attach small black strips called lekis to the telephone poles in order to set the eruv boundaries. These strips are nearly identical to ordinary ground wires and certainly less noticeable from the holiday displays, signs pointing out directions to local churches, or even house numbers the city permitted on the poles on a case-by-case basis. But the city would not allow the eruvs. As a result, the Orthodox community was homebound. Mothers couldn't push their babies in strollers to the synagogue. They couldn't even carry their prayer books to the synagogue. Without court intervention, the city's action would effectively prevent the Orthodox community from practicing their faith entirely. Thankfully, the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit realized this grave First Amendment violation. It concluded that, quote, the government cannot discriminate between religiously motivated conduct and comparable secularly motivated conduct in a manner that devalues religious reasons for acting, unquote. Singling out the religious conduct of one group not only prevents the free exercise of that faith group, it damages everyone's religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
But I feel it's so important that we know what's going on, and you folks do a great job of it. And I also had joined, it's the best thing to do. Like somebody said, they do $1 a day, and they don't feel that so much. At the end of the month, they've got $30 to send right off. And it's up to us citizens to pay attention and do what we can, and to pray and to help you out as much as we can.
Thank you so much for everything that everyone in that room does, and that we need this show like you wouldn't believe.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
So I've been listening to y'all for years. I'm not a politico whatsoever. I believe in voting, yes, but if it weren't for y'all, I wouldn't know how to vote. I'm serious. I wouldn't know the first thing about voting, but I do now.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Dr. Ron Rhodes in studio with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Israel on High Alert. What can we expect next in the Middle East? It is published by Harvest House, 250 pages, and one of the chapters is the conflict over rebuilding the Jewish temple. Now, this has got to be a question, Ron, that some people are wondering about. I've been to Israel, and I've actually gone through the Temple Institute, and I know they're working behind the scenes. But there are a lot of people that have traveled to Israel or just looked at the news saying, it doesn't seem like there's just any possibility that a temple could be built on the Temple Mount because you have the Muslim Dome of the Rock there, and it would virtually have to be cleared off, you would assume, for it to be built. So talk about that for a minute.
Well, it is an issue to wonder about. I mean, there's a lot of discussion on that among those who are interested in Bible prophecy. Let me say, first of all, that the Scriptures are clear that the temple will be rebuilt. We know that from Daniel 9:27, where we are told that the Antichrist will allow sacrifices in the temple for the first half of the tribulation. And, of course, Jesus himself in his Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 makes reference to a desecration of the future Jewish temple. So we know it's going to be rebuilt. But the problem is, how does it get on the Temple Mount? I mean, that's just a controversial issue. Let me tell you my viewpoint on that. In my viewpoint, the Ezekiel invasion, which involves Russia and a number of Muslim nations such as Iran and Sudan and Turkey and some other nations, are going to launch a massive invasion into Israel in the end times. It's my view that that could possibly happen before the future tribulation period. And Israel stands no chance of success, but God destroys the invading force. And if you can imagine this massive Islamic force moving against Israel, shouting Allahu Akbar, and then God gives this tremendous testimony of himself, as we're told in the book of Revelation, by completely destroying this force. The fact of the matter is that once this invading force is taken out and the Muslim forces are largely destroyed, I think that, number one, it's going to be much easier for the Antichrist to sign that covenant with Israel. And number two, make note of the fact that it's called a strong covenant in the book of Daniel. Strong means it's backed by strength. And, of course, you're talking about the most powerful person in the world at that time, the Antichrist, is going to be backed by his strength. And many believe that part of this strong covenant will be Israel's freedom to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount. And anybody that disagrees with that, take it up with the Antichrist. That's basically the way that it very well could happen. But you see, the fact is there will be much less Muslim resistance once that Islamic invasion into Israel takes place and God destroys the invading force. And so it's going to be a different atmosphere then than it is today. And when you think about it, that same destruction of the Islamic forces will also open up the door in other ways. For example, it will open the door for this false religion of the end times to come about, because the two groups of people who would resist that have been taken out. Christians have been taken out at the rapture. They've been taken off the earth prior to the tribulation. And now the Muslim forces have been destroyed as they invade Israel. So those are the two groups that would really stand against false religion. So now they're removed, and that makes it much easier for the false religion to emerge. It also makes it much easier for the Antichrist to come into world dominion. For example, the Muslims are looking for a worldwide global caliphate. But if they're out of the picture, then that means that it's much easier for the Antichrist to emerge into world dominion. You know, especially after he signs this covenant with Israel and apparently solves the Middle East problem. So, I mean, there's a lot of different aspects of all of this, but bottom line is I think that the temple will be rebuilt. There is the Temple Institute that is prefabricating instruments and clothing. We've also got the reestablishment of the Sanhedrin, which is important because Sanhedrin basically chooses a high priest for the temple. And just recently, the Sanhedrin has called for architectural plans to be designed, and they're also on a fundraising campaign right now. They're raising money for that rebuilding. Meanwhile, as you watch Jews in Israel, they go up to the wall and they're always praying, Lord, allow us to rebuild our temple on the Temple Mount. Now, it doesn't even have to happen until the tribulation period, Kerby.
Right.
That building of the temple doesn't happen until the tribulation period. But isn't it interesting that we see things happening even in our own day? And we don't want to set dates. God tells us not to. We don't want to set or even imply dates. But isn't it interesting that we're seeing things taking place in our own day which seem to be setting the stage for the eventual fulfillment of those prophecies?
Well, again, this book, Israel on High Alert, What Can We Expect Next in the Middle East, really kind of gives you a sense of how this plays out. No date setting there, but certainly looking at some incredible trends that are flowing in the same direction. And 15 chapters plus a postscript and a number of appendices, which you're going to find as really helpful in this book.
Well, and I like to end with some good news. I talked a little bit previously about the rebirth of the remnant. And the way that unfolds is this. Jesus told the Jewish people to get out of town quick, get out of Jerusalem quick, once the Antichrist sets up his headquarters there in Jerusalem. And that happens at the midpoint of the tribulation. Well, the Jewish remnant goes into the wilderness to escape, where God sustains them for 3.5 years. At the end of that 3.5-year period, the Antichrist and his forces are moving against the Jewish remnant. Mm-hmm. And it talks about how all the kings of the earth and all the countries of the world will join in this movement against the Jews. So they don't stand a chance. But it's at that point that the veil of blindness is removed from the Jewish leaders and the Jewish people. They suddenly recognize that Jesus is the Messiah after all. They believe in him, and they call out to him for deliverance. Now, most people don't think of the second coming as a rescue mission.
Yeah.
And certainly the second coming is much more than a rescue mission. But it at least includes rescuing the Jewish remnant. And it's following that rescue that Jewish remnant is invited into the millennial kingdom, which Christ himself will set up. And so, that's kind of ending things on a good note.
Yes.
There is a hope for Israel, like Paul talks about.
From the covenant in Genesis to the fulfillment of the covenant in Revelation.
Absolutely.
That is just amazing. Again, just a fascinating book, 250 pages, published by Harvest House. And again, don't forget that we have a link to ronrhodes.org, and that's where you can connect with him at Reasoning from the Scriptures Ministries. And if you have questions or you'd like to know about some of his books and other resources, all available there at Reasoning from the Scriptures Ministries. And Dr. Ron Rhodes, always great to have you in studio.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
We're going to take a break, but just before we do so, as you've heard us mention, we have been in the midst last week of having a special Truth Team Week. And if you would like to join with us, we still have some money left over as a match fund. We had an individual in the studio last week that said, I want to put down a match, and said, it can exist for more than a week, which I appreciate, because we, for the very first time, were not able to meet our match on Friday. So it is still available to you. Last time I checked, it was about $5,500, probably down to about $5,000 now. That means, again, if you'd like to join us as a donor for the Truth Team, it could be as simple as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. That $360 would be matched, so it becomes $720. And again, that pledge line number you can call while we're going off the air here is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Of course, you can also go to the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Join Now. You'll also notice as you do that there are some thank you gifts we like to put in your hands for your participation. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
1 minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, in the last hour, we were talking a little bit about anti-Semitism, and I was alluding to the fact that we were going to get back into that conversation this hour, and we certainly will do so, because we've talked about the rising level of anti-Semitism, not only around the world, but even in the United States, sometimes on campus. So we're going to talk about neo-Nazis on campus, we're going to talk about anti-Semitism and a variety of other things, with an individual that has been on this program many times, with Marlon Maddox and with me and Penna Dexter and others. David Horowitz, of course, was one of the founders of the New Left back in the 1960s, editor of that largest magazine, Ramparts, and then, of course, has authored a lot of different books, some with Peter Collier, but more recently, of course, we have talked about the Unholy Alliance, Radical Islam and the American Left. We've talked with him about the professors, the 101 most dangerous academics in America. David Horowitz is the founder of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, which formerly was known as the Center for the Study of Popular Culture. And we have a link to his website, davidhorowitzfreedomcenter.org, and also an article that appeared in Front Page Magazine, written by another individual on the neo-Nazis on campus. David Horowitz, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, thank you.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, I know we have some newer listeners that might not even know your history back in the 60s and 70s. As an individual, myself, who was born in Berkeley, California, around some of that then, I was familiar with you, but I think for our younger listeners, they might even not know of some of the work that you did as one of the founders of the so-called New Left in the 1960s.
Yeah, I was raised by card-carrying communists who wanted to down to the Cold War and create a Soviet America. I was one of the founders of the New Left, and I ran into a wall when they murdered, the Black Panthers murdered a friend of mine. And after much soul searching, I began to see that this country, America, which is based on Judeo-Christian values, which values the individual above the group, individual freedom, individual accountability, is a great boon to mankind. And I knew from my experience in the left that the left is out to destroy it. Everyone who calls themselves a progressive, well, we have a slogan on our at frontpagemagazine.com, my webzine. Says inside every progressive is a totalitarian screaming to get out. They want to control. They want to really erase individuals. They want identity politics, which is the politics now. The Democratic Party is really cultural Marxism. That white people oppress everybody. That we live in a white supremacist culture, and everybody is oppressed. And this, I've taken on as one of my campaigns to fight the terror front on American campuses. We talk about there were a bunch of clowns in Charlottesville, maybe numbered 500. Not a very significant group of people. There's no right-wing neo-Nazi who holds office anywhere. But on our campuses, on the 200 premier campuses in this country, there's a group called Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a
Right.
front organization for Hamas, terrorist organization. And look, it's not just the Jews, it's just the canaries in the mine. The fact is that Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS have slaughtered more Christians, many, many more Christians in the last few years than they have Jews, although there's a war brewing between Iran and Israel. This might change those numbers. But still, it's a sign of the deep trouble that our country is in, that colleges, universities, whether it's Harvard or Yale or the University of Texas, they're really University of California, they fund these terrorist propaganda groups. Every terrorists have a political agenda. The terror is to enforce, it's to silence their opponents and create situations where their political agendas can succeed. Students for Justice in Palestine is an agent of Hamas that's carrying out its political agendas and propaganda. It's funded by Hamas, it's orchestrated by Hamas, and it supports all of Hamas's attacks in the Middle East on the state of Israel. So this is a war that nobody can afford really to ignore or stay out of. If we're going to defend our country, we have to defeat these people.
Again, we're talking with David Horowitz, and again, David Horowitz's Freedom Center, of course, is known for Front Page Magazine, Jihad Watch, and some of the others. But one of the articles we've posted here, which comes from frontpage.com, is looking at what he talked about, the Students for Justice in Palestine. And I think it's a good illustration, David, if we were to right now take our microphone outside of this studio and go up and down the street and talk to people and say, where would you find neo-Nazis? They would say, well, I saw that rally there that we just referred to a minute ago. But if you were to say, but some of the ones that are the most anti-Semitic are on college campuses, they'd say, no, that's not possible. Yeah, go ahead.
They openly say, and on Twitter, that Hitler didn't kill enough Jews and they have to finish the job. Twitter is busily banning people like me because I'm a conservative, but it lets these tweets go forward. And the universities, as they say, they fund these groups. These are hate groups. They're literally neo-Nazis. They want to exterminate the Jews. But of course, as I say, Christians are next in line. Well, they're not even next in line. They're already in line. ISIS wiped out with Obama's help because he did nothing. The oldest Christian community in the world, the church in Mosul, the cathedral in Mosul, had continuous Sunday sermons since the time of St. Paul, and that exists no more because Obama pulled us out of Iraq and allowed ISIS.
Let's take a break, and we'll see if we can get the phone working a little bit better. And again, talking about, matter of fact, that's just one of the conversations we had earlier in terms of Syria. You think of the place which had the largest percentage of Christians in the Middle East, and it used to be Iraq. Of course, we're talking about Mosul and the believers there. Of course, now the place where you have the largest percentage of Christians in the Middle East is in Syria. So we're going to talk about that as well. But again, this article we've posted, I think, gives you some great connection points between the Students for Justice in Palestine and Hamas, and also just the rise of the neo-Nazi mindset on campus and some of the statements from, for example, Students for Justice in Palestine. How many Jews died in the Holocaust? Not enough. And a variety of other comments, which we'll get to in just a minute. David Horowitz with us, and if you would like to join our conversation talking about neo-Nazis on campus, give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll have more information on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you've heard the phrase politics is downstream from culture. It is a way of explaining that what is at stake in our world often begins upstream in the culture. Popular culture is all around us and delivered to us through broadcast media and social media. We perceive the world through news reports, through movies, through entertainment programs, and through music. Every form of communication has a message. Sometimes it's blatant and intentional. Often it is subtle and not even perceived by the artist, actor, musician, or broadcaster. He or she may simply be telling a story, but that story comes from a worldview perspective. A wise and discerning Christian should frequently ask, what message is being delivered? Is the viewpoint true or false? How does it line up with biblical principles? Well, let's face it, many of us merely accept what we read, see, and hear uncritically. And that brings us to politics. We are bombarded by messages every day. Most Americans watch lots of television, listen to a fair amount of music, and visit various websites. Unless they are approaching all of the entertainment with lots of discernment, they'll begin to accept the worldview perspective of the writer, the actor, the director, the musician who controls the story and the perspective. Most of these stories come from a liberal, secular viewpoint that often becomes easier to embrace. If someone stood up and lectured to you about abortion, homosexuality, gender identity, your guard would be up. But if the stories portray liberals, feminists, and gays in a positive light, they get into our head and emotions. And if they portray conservatives and Christians in a negative light, the same thing happens. All this to say that we need to pay attention to popular culture because politics is downstream from culture. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hello, I'm Chuck Bentley, CEO of Crown Financial Ministries. I so appreciate the great work of Kerby Anderson and the Point of View team. Every day they step into the public arena to make a stand for truth by shedding biblical light on the issues that confront us all. Never backing away or compromising on the truth, they're making a difference for you, for me, and the next generation. It's important that we Christians put our money behind those causes that are having a meaningful impact. My wife and I personally support Point of View, and we encourage you to do the same.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Back once again, we're talking with David Horowitz. We had our Truth Team Week last week, and as I've mentioned before, but let me just mention one more time in case some of you just tuned in, we certainly always encourage you to support this ministry, but especially right now, we still have a match on the table. We were not able to meet it on Friday. The donor was allowed us to go a little bit longer, so I think we're still down to about $5,000, which means if you would want to make a gift today and go to the website pointofview.net, your gift of $100 becomes $200. If you join the Truth Team at $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, that becomes $720. So again, take the time to visit the website pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Join Now. And as you go to pointofview.net, you'll also find this article on neo-Nazis on campus, and it will educate you about Students for Justice in Palestine. David Horowitz with us. And David, as if we can, this is something that is happening on a lot of campuses, as you've mentioned, and it's something that we need to educate our listeners about, and then maybe even suggest that they take some action, if indeed they have a student that is on one of these campuses, to begin to expose what's taking place.
Yeah, as I say, Students for Justice in Palestine is on 200 campuses, but this is really the whole left. The whole left, they're anti-Semites. They hate religious people, Christians in particular. The only religious people they cut slack for are the Islamic fanatics who are bigoted and want to crush all other religions. I mean, Islamic imperialism is a huge threat. And the whole political left, the progressives, the Democratic Party are busy, inviting them into Western countries where they have contempt, such contempt. I mean, there's a rape epidemic in Europe, and it's because of the attitude toward normal Islamic attitude towards women. That's what's producing that rape epidemic. They despise Westerners. They despise their Judeo-Christian roots, and everybody who calls themselves a progressive is sympathetic.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, we have a broadcast all over the country, but one of the stories that you tell is about a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, one of the co-founders of this organization.
Hatem Batsian, exactly.
Now, talk about that for just a minute.
Yeah, well, he called for an intifada in America. Intifada, he called for it in 2001, which was when he's an agent of Hamas, the terrorist organization, and that intifada was a suicide bombing intifada. So he wants there to be suicide bombings in America to establish an Islamic republic here, or an Islamic caliphate. This guy is the co-founder of Students for Justice in Palestine, chairman of an organization called American Muslims for Palestine, which was organized by Hamas and was funded by Hamas, and it's the way the SJP gets its money. And this guy is a professor at Berkeley, and of course what he heads there is the Islamophobia project. Islamophobia is a term which the Muslim Brotherhood coined about 20 years ago to silence its critics. Anybody who criticizes Islamic misogyny, Islamic hatred, murderous hatred towards gays, Islamic murderous hatred towards Christians, anybody who mentions or criticizes that is an Islamophobe.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the things I've run into before, as I've said on this program so many times. When everybody's a racist, nobody's a racist. When everybody's an Islamophobe, nobody is. Because there would be, I think, a legitimate use of terms like Islamophobic, the individuals that are just fearful of anybody that looks Muslim. But the term is overused, just like the word racism is overused all the time. True?
I think you're being too Christian when you say that. There have been 33,000 terrorist attacks that have killed people since 9/11, and 100% of them are carried out by Muslims. That doesn't mean, there are 1.5 billion Muslims. If you look at the surveys, maybe 60% of Muslims are, law-abiding people like everybody else, but 40% of them on every survey support this holy war against the West, which means it's against the Crusaders, which is the term for Christians, the Jews. So I think, to be fearful of the Islamic community is prudent. I as a Jew, I have friends who are Muslims, obviously. They're wonderful Muslims like Zudi Yasser. But if a Muslim stranger comes to me, they have to show me that they don't hate me because I'm a Jew. And why is that? Because their prophet, Muhammad, in one of their holy texts, which has never been repudiated, calls for the extermination of the Jews as the price, for the day of redemption to come, in so many words.
So again,
I think it's healthy. I think we should. Islam is not a religion like Christianity. The Son of God was a peace-loving carpenter who never hurt a fly. the prophet of Islam, Muhammad, was a warrior who committed a genocide in his lifetime. I could go on, but he is the role model. And that means that you have to, if somebody says they're a Muslim, you have to see what that means for them, whether they're following their prophet, who was a genocidal imperialist and murderer, or whether they are just saying those 5 prayers they have to say to be Muslim.
Let's, if we can, talk about some action items, because as you know, David, we certainly do encourage people to take action. You have some flyers, you have some posters, you have some booklets, and especially if you are near a college campus, you have a young person on a college campus, this is a resource that's available. So talk about what people can find when they go to your website, the David Horowitz Freedom Center.
Yeah, a better site is Front Page Mag.
Okay, FrenchPageMag.com.
Okay. But, yeah, we have a lot of literature about this threat, the terrorist threat on our campuses, and about the threat generally from the left, which has invaded our schools. I mean, what's going on in the K-12, we have a whole website devoted to what's going on in the K-12 schools called StopK12Indoctrination.org. They're racist. They're teaching that white kids in the 1st and 2nd grade have white skin privilege, and that they're oppressing blacks. I mean, it's terrible what's going on in our schools, the indoctrination. This is nothing like the schools that anybody who was, say, born after, before 1960 would have experienced when they went to school.
So again, let me just encourage you to go to the website, frontpagemag.com. You don't even have to write all that out, because the article we've posted here on neo-Nazis on campus will actually take you to that. And so that will give you a chance to benefit from some of those resources. So let me, just before we take a break, talk about the fact again that we just finished off our Truth Team Week. And if you would want to join with us, we wanted to carry some of that action and that enthusiasm last week over to today. So let me just mention again that we still have a match on the table. And if you'd like to help us out financially and appreciate some of the conversation that we've had today, feel free to give us a call. That number for the pledge line is 800-347-5151. If you have any difficulty getting through that, then simply go to the website, pointofview.net. That way, actually, you can actually see some of the resources that we are making available. We have some welcome gifts, which at various levels are available to you. So that's available. And, of course, you can also make your pledge online. Don't have to have all the money right now, but we certainly do encourage you to make a pledge. And as you do so, we would appreciate that, because you'll help us to continue bringing these kinds of programs to you in the future. Again, the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Join Now, and we'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
One minute. Give me 1 minute here for 2 very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now. 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212, encouraging your phone calls in the last half hour, kind of an open line. And we started off this segment about an hour or so ago talking about the attack to Syria. The United States President, of course, Donald Trump, as well as British and French allies, were involved in a joint strikes in Syria. And those were actually roundly applauded, interestingly enough, on Saturday because of the concern that chemical weapons had been used to maybe kill more than 40 individuals in the rebel-held town of Douma. And there was a concern that maybe both sarin gas and chlorine gas were used in the April 7th attack. And, of course, the warning to Damascus that any repetition would be met with renewed firepower. The response has been positive generally from the Allies. Matter of fact, the Allies signaled their resolve to return to diplomacy because they actually launched an attempt in the United Nations to, first of all, investigate the chemical weapons attack. Also circulated a joint draft resolution at the Security Council that called for unimpeded deliveries of humanitarian aid and an enforcement of ceasefire and demands that Syria engage in UN-led peace talks. So this was, of course, something brought about by President Trump. He announced it Friday night, and so far the response has been relatively positive, except, of course, from where you would expect, Russia, which denied all responsibility and actually slammed what they call the aggressive actions of the Western coalition. Yeah, of course, you have some other concerns, not the least of which is that Turkey, who is a NATO ally, has sometimes interpreted the ambivalence that President Trump has had towards Syria so far as a pretext to settle old scores against the Kurds in Syria. So we'll see where that goes. And, of course, as I pointed out when we had Ron Rhodes in studio here about an hour ago, that one of the signal successes during the Cold War was the ability to keep Russia out of the Middle East. And now, of course, Russia has platforms that are essentially threatening NATO's southern flank, already doing that with military operations. And to be fair, we also posted on Friday, and you can still find this by John Smirik, who has been with us on the program many times before. Would a U.S. invasion of Syria be a just war or sinful and wicked? And so he uses some of the so-called just war criteria to evaluate whether or not this would be appropriate. And the criteria of just war, for example, looks at would the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations be lasting, grave, and certain? And he says, are we certain, first of all, that the Assad regime just used chemical weapons in its war against jihadi Islamist militants? No, not at all. Of course, that's been something that a number of people have brought up. Tucker Carlson's brought that up. There was even a question asked of the Secretary of Defense, Mad Dog Mattis, Jim Mattis, who had some questions about that. Another question he had there is all the other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. And he says chemical weapons attacks in Syria have not been ongoing, but rare atrocity. It seems likely that if Assad completed his imminent conquest of the radical Islamic militants attacking the government's sovereign territory, that these attacks by either side would end. And then there must be serious prospects of success is another aspect of what is called the just war criteria. And I think it's fair to say that no one on any particular side is looking to engage more militarily. As a matter of fact, this piece that was in the Wall Street Journal said that even after President Trump announced mission accomplished, the next question is, well, what is next? Because, as they said, one bombing won't change the fundamentals of the Syrian battlefield or the strategic reality that the Russia-Iran-Assad axis is winning. And would we want to deploy troops? And, of course, we know the answer to that is no. So those are just a couple of issues related to Syria. And if you wanted to spend some time kind of reading through some of the articles, the one we've posted here today has to do with the Allies praising what Donald Trump and the British and French allies did. What we posted on Friday was, would a U.S. invasion of Syria be a just war? And so we sort of give you a point, counterpoint. And, of course, you could add to that a piece by Pat Buchanan, who has pointed out that if indeed we have some interest in Syria, those interests are pretty limited. He says those would involve, for example, containing al-Qaeda, exterminating the ISIS caliphate, and effecting the best deal we can for the Kurds, who have been loyal and crucial to our campaign. And he basically makes the argument that we can achieve all of those by not fighting a war. And so those are some ideas that might be helpful in terms of thinking through this idea of Syria. This is, of course, a conversation we're going to have for some time. And again, I would point you to a couple of the resources we've made available. Ron Rhodes' book in the first hour called Israel on High Alert. And we didn't have the greatest phone connection with David Horowitz, but again, some of the material on anti-Semitism on campus and anti-Semitism around the country and around the world are certainly some things we would point you to at our website, pointofview.net. Let me just, before we move on, talk about my commentary, because one of the things that we encourage you to do is to get our Viewpoints commentary. The Viewpoints commentary air on many of the stations that carry Point of View, but they air on many other stations that do not carry Point of View, but gives me an opportunity to share some of the things we learn when we're on this program. And if you don't already have the Viewpoints commentary coming to your inbox, let me encourage you to do so. My commentary comes to your inbox free of charge Monday through Friday. Penedexter's comes on Saturday. And the commentary today is entitled Politics and Culture. And the reason we do this is, even though we spend a fair amount of time talking about what's happening in the political world, I've used the phrase, and you've heard John Stonestreet on this program use the phrase, that politics is downstream from culture. And if you think about this, popular culture is all around us. It's delivered to us through broadcast media, through the social media. Of course, we perceive the world oftentimes through news reports, through movies, through entertainment programs, even through music. And if you think about it, every form of communication has a message. You know, do songwriters have a worldview? Sure. Do news broadcasters have a worldview? Sure. Do individuals that produce television programs have a worldview? Of course they do. And so sometimes that viewpoint is blatant. It maybe even is intentional. But I would have to say, for every person that has a desire to really try to change your mind, and those would be people that are commentators or people that are directors of movies who have an agenda, oftentimes the viewpoint isn't so much blatant or intentional. It's more subtle and maybe isn't even perceived necessarily by the artist or the actor or the musician or the broadcaster. He or she may simply just be telling a story, but you know what? That story comes from a worldview perspective. And so I think a wise and discerning Christian, and if you're a listener to Point of View, I really want to educate you and encourage you to be a wise and discerning Christian, really needs to be asking the question, what message is being delivered? Is the viewpoint true or is the viewpoint false? And how does the viewpoint line up with biblical principles? And let's face it, lots of times we just merely accept what we read, see, and hear uncritically. You go to a movie, your brain's kind of turned off. You're just watching the action movie. You're really not thinking about it. You go out on the internet and you watch a YouTube video. You're not really thinking, well, what's the viewpoint of this person here? Or even many times when you're even reading a newspaper or you're reading a book or something like that, you're not really thinking about that. And so it kind of brings us back to the conversation we have here at Point of View about politics, because every single day, we are bombarded by all sorts of different messages. We watch lots of television. We listen to a fair amount of music and visit various websites. And unless you're really approaching this with some level of discernment, it's going to be really easy for you to accept the worldview perspective of the writer, of the actor, of the director, of the musician who controls the story and the perspective. And frankly, as we'll talk about even later in the week, many of these stories come from people that have kind of a liberal, secular viewpoint, and it becomes real easy to embrace it. You know, if that same person stood up and lectured to you about abortion, homosexuality, gender identity, you know, your guard would be up. But if they tell stories that portray individuals who hold to some of those viewpoints in a positive light, it kind of bypasses our head, goes to our heart, bypasses our thinking, goes to our emotions. And so in some respects, it's really important for us to make sure that we have our worldview discerners on as we're listening to a radio program like this, as we're watching a TV program, as we're going to a website or wherever it might be. So my article today is about politics and culture, recognizing so often that politics is downstream from culture. We need to pay attention to popular culture. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jewish members of the Orthodox faith cannot push or carry objects outside their home during the Sabbath. However, for 2 millennia throughout the entire world, their religious tradition has expanded their home area with the creation of an eruv, but not in New Jersey. In the borough of Tenafly, Orthodox residents asked the city for permission to attach small black strips called lekis to the telephone poles in order to set the eruv boundaries. These strips are nearly identical to ordinary ground wires and certainly less noticeable from the holiday displays, signs pointing out directions to local churches, or even house numbers the city permitted on the poles on a case-by-case basis. But the city would not allow the eruvs. As a result, the Orthodox community was homebound. Mothers couldn't push their babies in strollers to the synagogue. They couldn't even carry their prayer books to the synagogue. Without court intervention, the city's action would effectively prevent the Orthodox community from practicing their faith entirely. Thankfully, the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit realized this grave First Amendment violation. It concluded that, quote, the government cannot discriminate between religiously motivated conduct and comparable secularly motivated conduct in a manner that devalues religious reasons for acting, unquote. Singling out the religious conduct of one group not only prevents the free exercise of that faith group, it damages everyone's religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
But I feel it's so important that we know what's going on, and you folks do a great job of it. And I also had joined, it's the best thing to do. Like somebody said, they do $1 a day, and they don't feel that so much. At the end of the month, they've got $30 to send right off. And it's up to us citizens to pay attention and do what we can, and to pray and to help you out as much as we can.
Thank you so much for everything that everyone in that room does, and that we need this show like you wouldn't believe.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
So I've been listening to y'all for years. I'm not a politico whatsoever. I believe in voting, yes. But if it weren't for y'all, I wouldn't know how to vote. I'm serious. I wouldn't know the first thing about voting, but I do now.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that, again, we have a match on the table. And so if you have not had a chance to respond last week to our Truth Team Week, we would encourage you to do so. And I'm hoping maybe before the end of the program here, we might have 3 of you call in. And as that one individual pointed out, $1 a day, that's hardly anything. $30 a month, $360 a year. We are looking for a few more of you to join the Truth Team. And if you do at that level, of course, you receive the Bible Stick, which we've talked about before. At the higher levels, $45 a month. Of course, we also make available these booklets, and you can find out a lot more simply by going to the website pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Join Now, and that's a leftover from last week, and just wanted to mention that for just a few more minutes. We had David Horowitz with us. Had to let him go because we didn't have a real good phone connection, but he was talking about the plight of Jews. And even in the first hour, we were talking with Ron Rhodes about anti-Semitism, and I thought it might be good to go back and talk about this column and this commentary that I did back on April 6th. Because it's entitled, Who Are the Luckiest? And it was something really interesting because another Jewish individual, Dennis Prager, really kind of stirred up some controversy by saying something that progressives would never let you say. David Horowitz and people like Dennis Prager and Michael Medved and a number of others, I think, would all agree with what Dennis Prager said, and that is, as a Jew, he says that American Jews are the luckiest Jews in Jewish history. And he also goes on to say that about other ethnic groups. And I thought it was kind of interesting because, as I've mentioned in some of my previous commentaries and he's mentioned on the air before, his father wrote his senior thesis on anti-Semitism in America. His father, Dennis Prager's father, was well aware of the fact that there was an anti-Semitic strain in America, and there were those who found themselves persecuted sometimes because they were Jewish. And so here, even though his father wrote his senior thesis on anti-Semitism in America, nevertheless, he taught his 2 sons that they were the luckiest Jews in Jewish history. And so Dennis Prager then still believes that, even though he himself has written a book on anti-Semitism and has taught Jewish history in Brooklyn College. And he talks about the fact that there are many more Israeli Jews that have moved to America than American Jews that have moved to Israel. Now, of course, we just heard just a minute ago Ron Rhodes talking about the number of Jewish people from all over the world that are coming to Israel, and that is remarkable in itself. But I thought it was interesting that Dennis Prager points out that some that have been in Israel now moved to the United States. And it's not really a reflection on Israel, what a wonderful country it is. It's a reflection really on how good it is for Jews to live in America. Well, Dennis Prager's not done. He goes on to then say this about black Americans as well, that despite the existence of racism in America, he also makes the case that, again, black Americans are among the luckiest blacks in the world. And one of the quotes comes from an individual who is a very distinguished black journalist. Maybe you've read him before in the Washington Post and other places, Keith Richburg, who, when he was actually watching what had been this genocide against blacks in Africa, and and I won't go into the details, but they're pretty gross about bodies, floating down the river and things like that. He, in his article, actually said that he admits that though his ancestors were brought to America on slave ships, he was grateful to be an American when he saw kind of the present-day horrors of Africa. And if nothing else, in a moment of candor in this article, which I have a link to if you'd like to read, going back to the April 6th commentary that I put out, said, "I thank God my ancestor made that voyage," which was really powerful. And then Dennis Prager, after talking about Jews and blacks, also then talked about Latinos. He said those who are from Latin America, who are now living in the United States, he also says they're the luckiest Latinos in the world. And he said, how could they or anyone else deny the fact that when millions of people from Latin America have been willing to leave their families, leave their friends, leave their culture and their language to come to America, and of course we know tens of millions more would want to do so. And it's just, again, a reminder of the fact that indeed we have people claiming that America is the source of evil, and they claim that racism and bigotry are alive. They vilify the founders. They ignore, I think, the good that America has done and focus only on what is wrong. But they may not admit it, but still, even those that criticize America are still some of the luckiest people in the world. So just a couple of resources that we wanted to make available to you. Next week I have one coming out that deals with the right to die, because you might remember we had Johnny Erickson Tada on the program talking about her updated book, When Is It Right to Die? Have one on abnormal America. And of course, we'll probably get into a variety of other topics related to Syria and to Israel and a lot more. So we're going to be all through this week focusing on ways in which you can be involved. I think you're going to tomorrow enjoy some of the conversation we will have about how you can be strategically involved in your community to make a positive difference. And just as we talked about the importance, as we talked with Ron Rhodes about the salt being the salt of the earth and the light of the world, we want to really encourage you and empower you and educate you to be able to do that effectively. So those are some things we'll be talking about tomorrow. Wednesday, we'll have our roundtable discussion. And we have just a whole group of millennials, from Jonathan Bodner to Chelsea Human. And in the last hour, we have Colonel Alan West in studio with us. So it will be quite a conversation indeed. Then, of course, Thursday and Friday, by the time we get to Friday, we'll have our weekend edition. And so that will be a roundtable discussion, which will also include Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. So just a lot of things to cover each and every day. But don't take the time. Please take the time, and don't forget to take the time to go to the website, pointofview.net. As you see my Viewpoints commentary, there's a place for you to sign up to receive it, and so that's one way we can minister to you. We have our Take Action items, our voter guide, as well as a video and a variety of other resources. But as you go there as well, you can also click on that button that says Join Now, and that is a way in which you can participate with us. And as you do so, again, I know you don't give to get, but we do want to put some things in your hand for joining us at the lowest level, $1 a day, $30 a month, $30 a month, and $360 a year. We put in your hands certainly this Bible stick, which has the entire New Testament on it, 40 different voices, word for word from the ESV. And then, of course, at the higher level, the Anniversary Club, $45 a month, we include not only the Bible stick, but these booklets on things like Sharia law and homosexual theology, privacy and surveillance, politicized culture, making your vote count, the Second Amendment, capitalism and socialism. And then at the $100 a month level, that Century Club, we also include the Amazon Echo Dot. And we'll be talking more about how we're going to be able to provide some Christian content there. I want to thank Doug and Steve for their help. We'll see you back here tomorrow here on Point of View.
Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.